Hey, I love therapy, and in fact, I've been going to therapy since I was around 6 years old. Though I talk about therapy a lot and may interview some therapists on the show on occasion, nothing that is said in this podcast should be considered a replacement for therapy. If you are struggling, I urge you to please seek guidance from a therapist because you are absolutely worth it. Hello, everyone. You are listening to Wine, Dine, and 69, a podcast about dating, relationships, sex, and self-love. I am your host, Rachel Dalton. Hope everybody is doing well. This episode's going to be a bit of a heavy one. I'm letting you know off the bat. So let me get into a couple things here. First off, some news on the PleazeMe front. If you're a new listener, PleazeMe is an amazing website all about sex positivity. It's kind of like a social media for like sex stuff. There are different podcasts on there, tons of different stuff. It's really a cool idea. And you might remember the episode almost around a year ago this year where I interviewed the CEO, Heather, of PleazeMe. Little news on that front, you have the opportunity to invest in PleazeMe. I'm going to go ahead and add the link in the episode notes. You can go ahead and check that out. Super cool new stuff that they have coming on out there. So it's going to be exciting to see how that platform continues to grow. Some people may remember from the very beginning of this podcast, almost 2 years ago at this point, that my co-host Anna and I wanted to bring somebody on to kind of discuss what intimacy looks like when you are a survivor of sexual assault. We're getting into real heavy stuff here, so let's go ahead and put a content warning here. We're going to put it in a couple different places so people are well prepared for what's going to come forward in this episode because it's intense. I'm letting you know right now. So we had wanted to bring somebody on to discuss that because neither of us felt comfortable being, the main voice of authority on that. And I actually did this interview around a year ago with Holly, and I wanted to save it. There's never really a good time to release an episode about sexual assault, right? Like, how do you fit that into a lineup? But I decided that I was going to release it now because April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, as we talk about in this episode. So it just seemed like now is the right time. So it's a little bit of an older episode, but still the content is just as important, just as relevant. There are a ton of resources that I'm going to link in the episode notes, including RAIN and the crisis text line, which I myself have used recently. And then she also provides a new one called Scarleteen as well. And there's a ton of great resources that we talk about as well, books, etc. There's not much to say. I'm going to let the episode kind of speak for itself, but I wanted to go ahead and draw some attention to those resources. Again, this is going to be, it's heavy stuff, right? So, content warning, if this is a topic that is triggering for you in any way, it might be good to skip this one. As somebody who's dealt with this type of trauma myself, I want to just encourage anybody who has dealt with this to keep going. It does get better, and I know that it doesn't seem like in the midst of it and you feel completely lost and like nobody understands, but you get to take this experience and it's yours. And like I said in the interview, you get to spin it into the tapestry of your life, and it's not always going to be a pretty tapestry, but it is yours. And that brings me some comfort sometimes. So, I'm not even really going to cut to a commercial break here. It just feels weird and kind of wrong. So I'm going to give a couple seconds here, and then we're going to jump right into this conversation. So again, this is your last content warning that we are going to be discussing sexual assault in the aftermath of what that looks like in a hospital setting, in a police setting, etc. So be prepared as you move ahead. And thanks, everyone. I'll see you on the next one. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I am here with my guest today, Holly. Holly, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, hanging in there. It's spring. Spring is here, and it makes everything feel a little bit more hopeful. But I have you here today to talk about a topic that actually I'm really glad. I reached out to you through my favorite murder Facebook group. I'm loving all of the murderinos that I'm meeting. It's absolutely great. But I, at one point, had started an episode with my co-host in the first iteration of this show where we were talking about sexual assault. And somebody wrote in and asked for a topic on how to have like a healthy sexual relationship after an assault of some kind. So I'm super stoked to have you on to talk about this because I think you don't hear about it a lot. So let's kind of like jump off from, who are you? Tell me a little bit about your background, what you do, etc.
So, my name's Holly Moyseenko, and when I was in college, I kind of fell into human sexuality in a nerdy way. And I ended up going to grad school for health education and promotion, and I focused in both women's health and human sexuality. I started volunteering at a rape crisis center. I ended up being there for almost 10 years, and I worked our 24-hour hotline. I
Oh
would
my
go out to
gosh.
the police station with people as well as to court with them after an assault. And I really learned that there is no normal way that people respond just because everybody has their own way that they deal with it. And
Yeah.
when I would walk into a hospital, just as an example, the nurse that called me would give me a little bit of a heads up, but it could be anything in there. It could be somebody that wanted to talk about the Kardashians. It could be somebody that didn't even want me in the room, or it could be somebody that
Mm-hmm.
went about it in a very logical way, like what step is going to be first.
Sure. Yeah, that's fascinating. There is a This American Life episode that they actually just turned into a series on Netflix called Believed, I think, or Unbelievable, something like that.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're talking about. This idea that people respond differently. People didn't believe this woman, this young woman, because of how she responded after the fact.
Yeah. And some people are catatonic and don't want to talk at all. And other people very much see it as this was an incident and they try and move on. And if you don't really deal with it, it's pretty hard to completely move on. But
Right.
I've heard people that, would call the hotline and say, people think that I'm all better because I went back to work.
Yeah. It's kind of like death, right? Like it's a grieving. You just because like, you're back at work and you're back doing your normal day-to-day things doesn't mean that you feel whole inside, it takes a lot of work to recover from trauma after sexual assault. So I guess going to a kind of logistics point, like starting with that. So obviously not all situations are reported. But if someone should choose to report, what does that process look like? You said that you go to the police station with people, that you might get called to the hospital. And I know that probably varies from state to state, but walk me through that.
So, in general, people can report in a few different ways. Where I worked at a rape crisis center, which was a nonprofit. People could call us and we would let them know usually how the process would work, as well as what their options were. So, in general, it's best if somebody wants to report to go to a hospital and get a rape kit done.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, sexual assault is one of the situations, one of the few crimes where the evidence is your body.
Yeah.
And the longer you wait, the less evidence there's there. In general, rape kits, they're not fun. There's no part of a sexual assault that tends to be positive for people. It's very invasive. I really liked it when I worked with what we called a SANE nurse, which is a sexual assault nurse examiner, and they get
Okay.
extra training so they can do the whole exam. They don't have to have multiple people coming in and out of the room. They've really received, I lived in Ohio at the time, and our SANE nurses received over, I want to say 200 additional hours of training just on sexual assault. So
Oh,
they
wow.
knew how to do the kit, that we keep the evidence in the best way possible, as well as let people know that if one step you don't want to do, you don't have to do it. So that means
That's
that,
really incredible. Yeah.
yeah, and I was a big proponent of giving people that power to be able to say yes or no to each step of the way.
Sure.
And we would make sure to have snacks and have it in a slightly more comforting area of the hospital. Like you weren't in the ER next to all the sounds and the buzzing and the machines,
Right.
but letting people know, like, if they want to shower, they can shower. Ideally, we want to get some evidence first, but if that's what's going to be most comfortable for you or for somebody to sit there and nap, because I remember sometimes going into hospital rooms and people hadn't slept in a day and a half.
Yeah.
But they do ask the story and they want to know in as much detail. And just because somebody gets a rape kit doesn't mean that necessarily you have to even talk to the police. They usually
Oh,
ask,
interesting. Okay.
oh, yeah, because there's some people that, there's times when the state can go ahead and take control of it. But if somebody wants to do that and they're not sure if they want to report, they don't have to. The nurses still do have to file parts of it, especially if it was a minor, depending on the situation that happened. But sometimes just to go get checked out, then you're able to get access to Plan B if you want it.
Okay.
If you want to get any sort of prophylaxis against any STIs, you can absolutely do that. And in most states, that is covered under Victims' Compensation Act. Because sometimes people say, I don't want to go do that if I'm going to end up getting a huge hospital bill, which is just, to
Mm-hmm.
me, punishing somebody that's already been through a lot.
Absolutely.
And some hospitals obviously have different plans. I remember one situation where the survivor needed their arm x-rayed, and they were really afraid of that hospital bill. And the hospital was able to work with her, and she didn't incur any costs.
That's really amazing. And I'm glad that that exists.
Oh, yeah. But I can totally understand. I mean, this show isn't about the insurance industry and money, but if I was already dealing with something mentally and physically traumatic, and then on top of that, I'm thinking, okay, so to walk in the door of the ER is at least $1,000, plus an
Mm-hmm.
x-ray, plus having to talk to a doctor who I've never met, who I fear could be judging me.
Right. You're being very vulnerable, both like emotionally, but also with your body
Oh,
when
yeah.
you've already like had that protection taken away from you.
Yeah, you've had your choices taken away, your protection
Mm-hmm.
taken away, any of your own ability to say anything taken away. And then you're going to have a medical provider who you don't know in a very sterile environment say, and now I need to take all of your clothing,
Yeah.
because that's all usually evidence. And you may
Yeah.
not get it back. Well, I'll put it this way. If you do get it back, it's not going to be in the same form because they're going to cut it up, that sort of
Sure.
thing.
Yeah, and I mean, uh, again, there's no right or wrong way to respond. My first thought is like, well, why would you want clothing back that you had been assaulted in? But again, everybody, who knows? Like, it could be something that somebody, it makes them feel powerful because they know that they survived it. Like, there's no, again, right or wrong way
Oh,
to go
absolutely.
about healing.
Yeah. And I've had people get offered Plan B and say, I don't want that. And for me personally, I would be like, hell yeah.
Right.
There's no way I would want a pregnancy from this. But for other people, it might go against their belief system. And part of being an advocate was learning to sit there. And if somebody said, what would you do? Being able to not let it focus on me and how I would handle
Right.
it.
Right. This is really heavy stuff, right? How do you take care of yourself? And like I imagine it's really hard to separate, when you go home at the end of the day. How do you self-care?
Um, Part of how I self cared was after 10 years saying, I can't emotionally do this right now,
Mhm.
and being able to take that step back. So, right now, I volunteer as a crisis counselor, but it's for all sorts of crisis problems, not just sexual assault. So I'm a little able to deal with it in small doses.
Okay.
But also for me, it was getting therapy and having some social support from friends that even if I couldn't, after going to the hospital, for an example, come home and tell my friends who was there and what happened, I could just say, that case was really rough and I need people
Mm-hmm.
around. And in general, social support is a good idea for anyone. It's a lot harder
Sure.
in a pandemic. But whether you're somebody that's supporting someone who's been assaulted or you're the one that's been assaulted, having a social support network, I think is just so important to have those people around you.
Definitely. So for, people who may have experienced something like this, um, how can survivors of assault, I asked you how you engage in self-care. What can they do after an assault to kind of get back to their roots, feel safe, being in their home again, being alone, taking public transportation, whatever it might be. What advice would you have for somebody who is kind of trying to get used to being back in the world again after everything has shifted?
Yeah, and that's the problem is that typically after sexual assault, the person can look physically fine and normal, but
Mm-hmm.
inside themselves, like you said, everything shifted, everything has changed, and your brain actually stores traumatic memories in a different place and in a different way, so they get accessed kind of randomly. And that's how, if somebody's dealing with PTSD, they can get randomly triggered and they don't always know
Yep.
what triggered it.
Yeah, definitely. I've alluded to my own life things. There's still the song that comes on, and whenever I hear it, I seize up. And it's interesting how things that might seem so, I don't know, menial, just kind of can cause that.
Oh, yeah. And it can be a song that has, for anyone else, nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
But in the
Yeah.
moment, it takes you right back. And
Mm-hmm.
stress, all that stuff can take a huge toll on your body and your brain. So, in general, I tell people to just try to be a little more kinder to yourself.
Okay.
As much as it sounds weird, just constantly remind somebody it wasn't their fault. I remember being on a phone call with a survivor of sexual assault, and she had been assaulted at least 30 years prior to our phone conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And this was early on with me volunteering. And I said, she was telling me about how she was dealing with things. And I said to her, you do realize what happened wasn't your fault. And the line went totally quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh my God, this woman just hung up on me. She's pissed off at me. And for about a minute, there was no sound. And then I heard her slowly crying. And she told me I was the first person to tell her that.
Oh my gosh.
And it just crushed me that she'd been assaulted as a child and nobody had ever once
Yeah.
told her that what had happened wasn't her fault. And when somebody's been sexually assaulted, I'm not going to get the quote right, but Amber Rose was on some TV show, and whatever people's feelings are about her are separate. But she basically said, if I'm laying beside somebody and I'm naked and they're naked and they have a condom on, I'm allowed to say no at any point in this exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would teach college, I would tell people, you could be mid blowjob and tell somebody, I'm done here.
Yep.
And once that's happened, it's done. It's got to stop right there. So for somebody just learning to be kinder, that it wasn't about what they were wearing or what they were doing or that they knew the person. The majority of people that get assaulted, it's not some stranger, it's not some person in a dark alley.
Yep.
It's somebody they know, and they may not know their whole name and where they live, but it's somebody that they've seen and they're familiar with.
Mm-hmm. And it's also important to say too that like you can have consensual sex with somebody once and then you know not decide another time after maybe you're in a hookup situation. Just because it happened once doesn't mean that it's always on the table.
Oh, 100%. You can have a couple that, let's say, they've been together for years and every Friday night they have sex. And this
Mm-hmm.
coming Friday, if one of them isn't into it, I don't care that they have sex every Friday like
Yeah.
clockwork.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you're with somebody or you always hook up, whatever the situation is, even if you were flirting earlier, it doesn't mean it's guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a society, we kind of need to get over that.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree. That wow, that story about the woman makes my heart really hurt.
It really
um,
did. And it's something that, I mean, that phone call happened probably 17 years ago, and it's stuck with me
yeah.
because it was just so intense at the time. And I think of that situation as a woman that needed to be a little kinder to herself because she'd
Mm-hmm.
probably spent all those years blaming herself.
Yeah.
And another thing that can help people sometimes is to be able to name what has happened to them. And it doesn't mean assault, but if they could just name it as that was bad, that was wrong,
Mm-hmm.
that was not okay. It can be difficult for people after being assaulted. A lot of people go through feelings of being disassociated or being numb or just wanting to ignore it. If I ignore it, it'll just go away.
Right.
But being able to say, like, what I was feeling earlier when I got triggered was anger.
Mm-hmm.
Because for some people, they can just be like, I felt this strong emotion and I don't know what it was. And then I moved on with my day. But to be able to go back and say, like, that was anger. I was angry that that happened to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, putting a name to it, identifying an emotion.
Oh, 100%. Because it can be hard for people to do. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the books I recommend to a lot of people that have been through any kind of trauma, but especially sexual assault, is The Body Keeps the Score. And in the book, the person that wrote it said, you need to be able to confront what happened to you, but only after you feel safe and not re traumatized by it. So,
Mm-hmm.
having that good support network. And I know so many people in my life that have been through something traumatic, whether it was a sexual assault or something else, and they try and just move on with their life. But if you never face that trauma, it doesn't just magically go away.
Definitely. Yeah, it's I mean it's like you said, like this person called and it had happened, you said 30 years prior or so. Um but yeah, if you don't deal, you're always going to feel a little off inside, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. And for some people, they never want to have anything to do with sex. They don't want to be seen as a sexual being. And for other people, they go to the opposite end of the spectrum. And
Hmm.
neither is wrong. It's just how a person decides to deal with it.
Definitely. Well, let's talk about that. Because that's something that I have some personal experience with, and I'm really interested in your take on it. Let's talk about how survivors of such sexual assault can approach intimacy again once they've done this work. They've indulged in taking care of indulge isn't the right word. They've done the work of taking care of themselves. They have gone to therapy, and they're being a little more gentle with themselves. What about a situation where somebody is ready to be intimate again, but has these fears and these blocks? And you said that some people, that was my experience. I mean, I didn't want to be a sexual being anymore. I had a really hard time looking at my body. So what advice would you have? How would you talk somebody through what these different reactions might be when it's time to approach intimacy again?
I think it's really hard in our culture because we're very, and I'm coming at this as both a sex educator and trying to help heal people and give them that power, but we're a very sex negative culture.
Yeah.
And I feel like that makes it even harder. Like, how are we supposed to see sex as something that can be positive and healing when our culture, and for some people, their religion, has taught them that
Mm-hmm.
sex and being a sexual being is bad?
Mm-hmm.
When there's nothing wrong with it. We're all sexual beings from the time we're in utero. It doesn't mean that we're always having sex, just like how somebody can be asexual and still can be a sexual being.
Right.
So I think in general, sex can be incredibly healing. It can be helpful mentally. I mean, science goes along with all of this. Having sex, whether it's with yourself or with another person or with whoever you want, it can help your immune system. It can help with your feelings. It can lift your mood. So, being able to start seeing sex as a good thing and what happened to you as something you didn't consent to, you didn't control,
Mm-hmm.
something that happened to you. So being able to kind of take that power a little bit back.
Sure.
And even something as simple as starting from the beginning with touch,
Mm-hmm.
because skin is one of our biggest organs, is our biggest organ, and how healing touch can be. And learning to be okay again with even touching your body. And it doesn't have to be sexual, it can be just wrapping your arms around yourself as a hug, or something I learned when I was going through some therapy myself was even to take the time to be indulgent with your body and put some nice smelling lotion on after a bath or a shower and really thank your body for what it does for you. As much as for some
Mm-hmm.
people that can sound corny. And again, these are all ideas and it just depends on what works for the individual person.
Yeah,
But
take what works and leave the rest.
absolutely. And maybe you don't want to just look at yourself naked in the mirror and be like, holy shit, my ass looks amazing today. That's okay if somebody's not there or will
Yeah.
never be there. But learning to be okay, and again, it's harder in a pandemic, but even holding hands with somebody, kissing them. And that's why it's important to have an understanding partner. I mean, I have a friend who is an author and wrote a series of books. In the one book, one of the female characters gets assaulted, and my friend, when she was writing it, reached out to some people just on Facebook and said, how would the partner deal with it? And she didn't want to focus completely on the partner because it was most important for her to focus on the survivor.
Of course.
But for somebody's partner who's been assaulted, how did they deal with it? Because the partner didn't want to just ignore her sexually, but didn't want to come across as predatory or creepy.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that can be a really difficult thing to kind of manage.
Yeah, and that's why open communication is huge. But also
Mm-hmm.
having people around them that can kind of, even if they're friends, that can understand, like asking, hey, I want to give you a hug. Is that okay right now? Or would that feel okay to you right now? And giving the survivor the chance to say yes or no. Or having friends that they can even say to, I really could use a hug.
Mm-hmm.
And starting there, and the more comfortable you get with things like that. I even had a friend that had been assaulted, and it had been a few years, and she wanted to have sex again. And she was like, is there anything wrong with me just finding a random person on Tinder? And I said, hell no, because for her, it
Mm-hmm.
was more comfortable to be with somebody that she didn't know and may never see again
Yeah.
versus somebody
Yeah,
that she did know.
definitely. I can see that.
And for her, it was actually a really good experience. She called me and she felt guilty because she said this person seemed to be very focused on her pleasure, and she enjoyed that she was able to just focus on what she wanted and nothing about them. And it kind of gave her that nice bit of power that she could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And she could do that with her sexuality.
Yeah, I'm grinning right now because that's a very familiar story to me. I think that is a very helpful tool is finding the power in feeling sexy, feeling the power in like just kind of taking it back. I don't know. It's a you're looking at your experiences and you're saying those do not define me. I still, you know, like feeling good. I still like being intimate.
Yeah. And knowing that you deserve that. I was
Mm-hmm.
personally in a abusive relationship and he assaulted me. And getting over that was doing things that made me happy. And
Mm-hmm.
I dye my hair, just as an example. And I currently dye it a color I've always liked, but he hated. And learning that I can do that and it doesn't matter what he thinks.
Hell yeah.
And I know that when I was getting over my relationship with him, learning that I could do things that felt good for me, whether or not they were sexual, but things that I enjoyed. And even just stopping and getting a soda you like or an iced tea or something that makes you happy that's only about your pleasure.
Absolutely. Taking your body back as a vessel.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Your body is a vessel. And if somebody's really unsure about touch with somebody else, as long as they're comfortable with it, grab a sex toy or two. See how it feels for you. Especially with sexual assault, it can be hard because your body and your brain don't always agree. So it can happen where when somebody's being sexually assaulted, their body responds. And this is a little more common with people that have a penis who have been assaulted, that they might get a hard on, they might ejaculate.
Mm-hmm.
It happens. It doesn't mean that you were okay with it, you liked it, you consented. So being able to take that back and bring yourself to that pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Now, is it I heard this once, and I just want confirmation whether it's true or not. In that same vein, your body like sometimes if a woman or a person with a vagina is assaulted, they might get wet.
It
And I
totally can
have
happen. And I mean, that's
yeah,
just, at the end of the day, that's friction.
exactly. It's like your body protecting you so that it like I don't know, is easier and hurts less maybe.
That can be part of it. And also sometimes just, and this was a phrase I said a ton as a professor, but bodies are weird. Sometimes
Mhm.
we can't explain all of it, but sometimes there's a little bit of friction on your clit and you might get wet, whether or not your
Mhm.
brain is terrified in that moment. I mean, we can say all these poetic and amazing things about sex, but at the end of the day, it's friction.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
I can definitely make sex sexy or unsexy. So at the end of the day, it's just friction. And for some people, that means that it happens at weird times. But also, let's think too, how many people do we know that get a hard on randomly?
Mhm.
I mean, the breeze was blowing outside of Target and somebody probably got a hard on earlier. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that they were like super excited about going into Target. It might have just been that some random memory popped up in their
Yeah.
head or how their pants were at the time.
Yeah. Friction.
100%. Yeah. Cause I've had people explain that their body was showing signs of arousal when they were being assaulted. And that has
Mhm.
nothing to do with them liking it or not liking it. It has to do
Definitely.
with just how those nerve endings were working and learning that sometimes nerve endings work in ways that you don't want or you're not okay with. And that has nothing to do with what you wanted.
I really wish that people talked more about this. Just this idea that just because the body responds this way doesn't mean that it matches up with what's happening in your brain or with your emotions.
Oh, yeah. I mean, ideally, your brain and body are in agreement, but it doesn't always happen. I mean, if
Yeah.
somebody has shock because they saw a car accident, their brain and body may not be in agreement.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting too, like the way that your body just kind of takes over sometimes.
Oh, yeah. It's the total fight or flight.
Mm-hmm. Like in a situation, and I'm not even thinking like necessarily in an assault situation, but your body's always giving you little signs as to what's going on. Whether that be with like an odor or um, you know, whatever it might be, rashes, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. When you get goosebumps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
And that actually reminds me of a quote from Emily Nagoski. And I actually wrote it down at one point because it really struck me and stuck with me. And she said, and this is from the book Come As You Are, a book I suggest to people for a litany of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But trauma results when a person has control over her body taken from her. She freezes and then she can't unlock.
Hmm.
And so for some people, when they get assaulted, they have trauma of some sort and it almost freezes your body. And even just people's muscles can become more tense.
Definitely. Okay. So you would say that to start off, touch as a very baseline like way of getting back to yourself, and I kind of recommend that in general for like anybody who even might just be a little bit uncomfortable with sex stuff or masturbating or something. Like what feels good in the body, what um puts off those pleasure sparks in your brain.
Oh,
Start there.
absolutely. Because, like, what feels good for me may not feel good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what felt good for me last night may not feel good tonight. It just depends on what mood I'm in. And just a small personal story from my life was that I don't want to say my mom encouraged me to masturbate, but my mom basically said, and this wasn't when I was a little kid, this is when I was older, but she was very age appropriate. And she said, if you expect somebody to please you, you need to understand what gets you going.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it's made so much sense the older I get that
Yeah.
if I don't know the best way to please myself and to calm myself, even, how could I expect somebody else to help? So if somebody's going through a trauma, certain things can help, like having something that can help ground you. So one thing I used to tell people that if they were going to court was to have like a marble or a stone or something that they could have in their pocket. So when they would start to maybe get a little more anxious, it was something that they could easily put in a pocket or have in their hand, and they could have it whether they were on the stand of the courtroom, waiting in a side room, any of that, that can kind of help bring them back to the present, into the moment. Because a big problem with people who, or I don't want to say a problem with, a problem that people experience who have been through a traumatic event is it's easy to kind of get triggered and your brain goes back to a different place. So if you can easily have a way to remind yourself, hey, I'm right here, it's 2021. And I've even known people that will say that out loud to themselves. Will tell themselves what day it is, look outside the window. Anything like that can really help.
Presence, like working on remaining in the moment. What is the thing that's like a focus on one thing you can touch, one thing you can taste?
It's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste.
Yeah. I whenever I'm anxious in any situation, I definitely try to focus on. That's why people want you to focus on breathing. It centers you, it grounds you, it brings you back to that present moment.
And it brings you back to focusing on your own body. And that's also an important part of like knowing your body and knowing what feels good for you, is learning like how to tense your muscles individually, tense your feet, and focus on relaxing it. Because for so many people, even for myself, I have a sticker on my planner that says unclench your jaw, because I was clenching my jaw so much during the day that I needed to like look on it as an actual physical reminder that I was doing it.
Yeah.
And that happens with a lot of people that have been through stress or trauma, that they will commonly like either tense their shoulders or hunch them over a little bit. And as time goes on, you do it so much that you don't even realize you're doing it.
Yeah. You morph. You start to morph.
Yeah. And so when you start to like notice when your muscles are getting tense, it's a little easier that then if you do go to be sexual with somebody in whatever way works for you, you'll notice if you start to tense up.
Yeah.
And then you can be like, hey, can we slow down, or can we do this instead? Or I don't want to do any of it.
Now, when it comes to that, like communicating, being able to communicate with a person once you're being physical again, once you have worked through, these different stages and are ready for that. What about disclosing to like a partner that you've been assaulted? I mean, I have experience with this, but I also like, I'm very much an open book, so it's really not a big deal for me to disclose any personal information, but not everybody's me. So what advice would you have? I know I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of kind of sex, relationship, dating podcasts, and a very common question that I see a lot is, should I tell my current partner about my assault past, and how? So what would you say about that?
So I'm definitely like you, that I'm the open book partner. I'm the open book friend. I've even put it out on like some work Instagram stuff, and it's really personal. It's not for everybody. Some people find it very easy to disclose right away. I always think it's a good idea if this is somebody you think you might be with, but it's super hard to do. And I think just like any other communication, knowing when is going to be most appropriate to bring it up. So I tend to tell people if it's anything related to something very personal or to your sexual being, choose a time when you're not in bed.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, choose your time. I think technology is awesome because I've been able to tell friends like, hey, is it something you'd be more comfortable saying via text? Because then you're not
Sure.
face to face with somebody. I mean, it used to be for me before a lot of cell phones that if I had to have a serious conversation, I preferred to do it while in the car because then you weren't
Yeah.
looking at each other. You were just staring
Yes.
forward.
I do that same thing.
It's worked well for me. So I always tell people, at least for me, if I'm very nervous to tell somebody something, I don't want to do it to their face. And I'm
Mhm.
always afraid that I'm going to end up butchering my words and slipping all over them. So sometimes even taking the time to write it out, if you're doing it via text and you're trying to figure out how to say it, you can type it out as many times as you want and then decide to hit send or not. And I'm even the person that I'm old fashioned in the sense that I like a good old pen and paper. So I
Mhm.
might write it out and then I can rip it up. I don't even have to do anything with it.
Yeah.
Then if I decide I don't want to tell the person, I don't have to. I want people to keep in mind that the stats for sexual assault are so high in general. If you think you don't know somebody that's been assaulted, it's just because they haven't told you.
Yep.
I mean, I was teaching a human sexuality class once and I had the stats up on the screen, and a person in the room, a guy, said he thought those numbers were way too high. And I said, these are actually just the reported numbers, not the estimated or projected. And it actually took the people in the room kind of took over, the fellow students. And there was a lot of people that even said they'd been assaulted, their best friend, their girlfriend, their friend, their whoever had been assaulted. And I let it go on for a second because they weren't personally attacking him, but they were letting
Sure.
him know. And that's kind of when I stopped him and I said, you do know people that have been assaulted. They just don't want to tell you, or they
Yeah.
don't need to tell you because when you've been assaulted, that's on you. You now get to decide who gets that
Yep.
information. And
Yep.
if you tell no
That's
one,
yours.
yeah, that's your info. Because I would
Mhm.
have people, when I was a volunteer, ask me, do I have to tell my work, my parents, my this? As long as you're over the age of 18, you decide. It's
Yeah.
entirely up to you who you tell and who you don't tell. And for some people, April Sexual Assault Awareness Month, sometimes that's a more comfortable time.
Yeah.
Or even just,
No, I can see that. I actually didn't know that April was Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
the teal ribbon
Interesting.
is their
Oh, okay.
big thing.
Interesting.
So even just putting information out there, whether or not you say you were assaulted, when I put stuff up on social media, even just about, hey, it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, here's the stats, it's interesting how many people will comment and say that they've been assaulted.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just helpful for people, even if it's in an anonymous way, to say, me too. To know that there's other people out there. I mean, I remember growing up and thinking no one had been assaulted, that it was this rare thing that happened. It was something that happened with a drink at a party or in a dark alley.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really important to see how many people are stepping forward and showing that it is an epidemic.
Yeah, it truly is.
I mean, by the CDC definition of pandemic, it's totally a pandemic. If you think about COVID, compare those numbers to sexual assault.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
everybody right now, and I'm hoping in a year or two, this will be incredibly dated, what I'm saying, and everybody will laugh and think about how silly it is, but everybody's wearing masks right now. And then when we think about sexual assault, if you go into high schools, they'll tell girls, oh, you need to cover up because it's distracting for the boys. When it's not about what they're doing. I don't care if somebody's completely naked. That doesn't make it okay.
Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah, 1000%. Absolutely. So, okay, you are a sex educator and you taught in these classes, and it's interesting too. I think the stat is what, 1 out of 5 women?
So it depends on where you get your stats. Anywhere from between 1 in 3 to 1 in 6 is what I see.
Okay. Yeah, most women that I know have been sexually assaulted.
I have to agree with that, sadly. That when I think about
Yeah,
it, it's easier for me to say this one and this one haven't been.
exactly. Yeah, I'm going through my list of my like friends, my female friends in my head right now, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can only think of 2 in my that at least haven't told me, and maybe they have in
And that's an
fact,
important
but
part. Maybe they haven't. And then I also have some friends that will say, well, it wasn't like it was a real assault,
yeah,
or they're just not sure. And
yeah,
these gray areas happen, and it doesn't make it any less valid.
absolutely. Well, how okay. In the first episode of the podcast, we talked about the taboo of sex, and we talked about sex education. I shared that my experience with so we had a police officer in our school, and the section on in our sex ed class, I guess it was the sex ed part of the health class. Uh, Sexual assault was covered for I think maybe 10 minutes of like the entire semester long class. And basically all it was this police officer coming in and saying, this is what rape is. And of course it was more of a dark alley, somebody putting things in your drink. It wasn't like, the friend that it wasn't the situations that it really is more than, the Brock Turners. But they didn't say you shouldn't assault people because, you know, they're a human, they have their own autonomy, all the reasons why it's wrong. What they said was, these are the penalties that you will face from the justice system if you rape someone, so don't do it.
And those penalties in general are, I would say, very light.
Yeah, I mean, Brock Turner's out, right?
Exactly. And I mean, I
Yeah.
remember listening to that episode and just nodding my head the whole way there. And I actually ended up driving into work and sitting in the parking lot for a few minutes to just kind of center myself. And much like you, my sex ed, well, I went to a Catholic all girls school. So our sex ed
Okay.
didn't even have to be medically accurate.
Yeah.
And my mom actually pulled me out of our sex ed because it was so bad. So I had to sit with all the
Fantastic.
kids whose parents thought it was too liberal. And luckily, my mom was a college librarian. So she was like, I've got books, I've got info.
Yeah. I
But
love that.
yeah,
Your mom sounds like my mom.
yeah, I mean, she was very much like, this is ridiculous. This is not
Yeah.
how it is. And my mom did tell me that, you know, she basically warned me that not everybody is nice and friendly, and some people have bad motives. And I think telling people, well, here's the consequences, that doesn't really stop people.
No.
And we tell people all these things. Like, I remember I was a bartender. Bartending paid for school for me. And we would learn about how to watch out for somebody putting things in a drink and how to warn somebody. But we didn't get real training on like how to stop assaults when they happen. I remember
Right.
seeing a guy putting things in a girl's drink,
Oh
and I
my
didn't know what
gosh.
to do in the moment. And I just knocked over the cup.
Yeah.
And I remember the evilest look he gave me. And I got one of our security guards and I told him. And when the girl went to the bathroom, we stopped her and we told her.
Yeah.
And we said, do you need us to call anyone? Do you need us to do anything? And she asked me to just act normal, but make her non-alcoholic drinks.
Oh, man.
And it's just those moments that we don't really learn about that. I mean, I remember in school hearing like you heard, like, if you're at a party, don't accept a drink from somebody you don't know. Go out in a group, go with friends. And you can do all those things and it can still happen.
Yeah. There was I'm in Philadelphia, and there was just a couple weeks ago, there's a big Macy's in the middle of the city by City Hall, and a woman was shopping in the middle of a Sunday afternoon with her husband. She went to the bathroom. There was a man waiting in there, and he assaulted her in the middle of a Macy's, the middle of the day on a Sunday. And then he left.
And that's the thing, is we tend to think that this happens dark alleys at night,
Right.
strangers. It can happen in the middle of the day. And that,
Mm-hmm.
to me, is what we need to focus on, that it can be somebody that looks like Brock Turner. And I'm just going to keep,
Right.
he's a great example. And I'm glad you used him, because he was this like clean cut white kid, good family. And we still hear in the news about how horrible this has been for poor Brock Turner.
I know. Fuck you, Brock.
Exactly. Fuck you. Like, you're a horrible, horrible human. And the fact that you are trying to be the victim now is ridiculous. Yeah. And that's why I think it's important to talk about how this woman, in your example for Macy's, was doing everything right.
Mm-hmm.
And even if she'd been out shopping by herself, who cares?
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we change our consent around so that our sex ed in general? I mean, I can't even touch that right now. But how do we specifically consent? How can we improve teaching about consent in terms of when you're, hooking up with somebody, when alcohol is involved? Like, how do you make sure you get consent? I know there are a lot of cases of people making fun of the idea that, like, you check in, because maybe it's not super sexy, but yeah, what's your take on that? How can we?
A few things. One, you can totally check in and make it sexy. You can keep it very clinical and be like, can I put my arm around you? Or can you make it like, you're in the middle of a sex act. Let's just say somebody's going down on you. You can check in with them and be like, I love how your tongue feels. Do you like how this is?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be super clinical. Like, is it okay if we move to intercourse?
Right.
It can be, I would really love your cock inside me.
Yeah.
Do you want that?
Now we're talking.
Yeah, it can be totally sexy. But I also think you saying the state of sex ed is so important, because it is sad. And as a sex educator, on one hand, it's like, wow, I will never be hurting for a job. But on the other hand, it's so upsetting. And I think we can talk about consent and sexual assault at any age, as long as it's medically accurate and age appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did have a contract through where I volunteered, and I talked to preschool and kindergartners about consent. And obviously I wasn't like, when you're having sex.
Right.
But we had a little storybook, and it had to do with having like a trusted adult and being in charge of your own body. And it even, one of the things we talked about was, if you go over to a relative's house and they want to hug you goodbye and you don't want to hug, you're allowed to say no.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I think that's so important, because I remember being a kid and that was never an option. Yeah. And I don't say that like my parents were horrible parents with that. I think it was just very much a product of the time, that if you leave, you got to go hug grandma and grandpa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But letting kids know that. And there's a fine line. I mean, I don't think we should let 8-year-olds rule their parents. And if an 8-year-old doesn't want to go to the doctor, agreeing with them. But if they go to the doctor and they have to get a shot, hey, do you want that in your right arm or your left arm?
Right. Give them some autonomy.
A little bit of autonomy can go a long way. And I think that if you start young with that, it's easier as an adult. And also, we need to, in our culture, make it okay to say no. And I'm sure you're familiar with this just because we're both murderinos, but this idea that if you say no to a guy, and I'm just making it a little sexist of a woman and a man, but
Sure.
if you say no, how they're going to respond. Like, I remember being at the gas station a few weeks ago, and a guy was talking to me, and I was like, oh, no, thank you. Not interested. And he was like, why not? And it was this moment of, I'm in a gas station and nobody knows I'm here. And I don't think the guy was going to come over and kill me.
Right.
But it was a scary moment. And it's this idea that we've seen in the news. A girl gets asked to prom. She says no, the guy kills her.
Yeah.
And we need to make it more okay. And I think a lot more comfortable for people to be able to say no. And I'm almost 40. And when I was a bartender, the reject hotline was a very popular number to give out.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I know
Oh
that
shoot.
I know it goes way
Throwback.
back, but I think it still exists. And that was,
Yeah, the rejection hotline, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
it was kind of
Oh
cheeky and
man.
sassy because it was like, if you want to be read a sad poem, press 2.
Yeah.
But I think we don't want to have to rely on that. That it can be
No.
kind of in the moment. If somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, give me your number," and I say no, what can happen? But it was easy to do when I was bartending or what have you. I could just hand that over and be like, "Oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
sure, here's my number."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's cheeky and funny, but I completely agree that you or one rather, uh we really do have to switch around this idea. I have had to explain to my male friends that sometimes when a guy will hit on me, my male friends will be like, why didn't you just like tell him to fuck off? And I have to explain to them that number one, it's easier a lot of the time to be nice and kind. And there's a
Oh,
lot of issues
100%.
with the patriarchy that goes along with that. But in addition to that, like, you don't, I was at a situation where I was at a bus stop and if a guy like hit on me there, I don't, I'm stuck. I'm stranded. Like, he could do something to me if I say like fuck you, you know? So it's also a way of protecting yourself.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had a guy once hit on me while I was walking my dog, and I purposely went past where I lived because I was like, this guy's
Mm-hmm.
literally following me in his car.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
don't want to go to my apartment where I live by myself with a 21-pound dog who's blind.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure that the dog would do their best though.
He really would, but still, it's one of those things that I think in general women are so used to dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And just like you said, it'd be so easy to tell a guy that's being creepy and weird, fuck off.
Right.
But then you have to deal with the possible consequences. And I've had some very
Exactly.
nice, I don't mean to make it sound like I get hit on all the time, which is not what's happening, or that everybody's rude. I've had some super polite people hit on me and just say,
Oh,
like,
sure.
hey, would you like to go out sometime? And if I tell them no, they're like, okay, have a great day. And those people I
Yeah.
almost want to chase down and like thank them.
Shoot your shot, but being cool about it, you know?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it's like, I want people that if you see somebody and you're like, hey, you look good, you can let them know without being creepy
Mm-hmm.
and shoot your shot. You
Definitely.
never know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess my last questions before we wrap up here is kind of a two-parter. How can someone best support a friend or loved one who's going through something like this? And are there any resources that you would recommend, both for somebody who is acting as that support, but also for the person who's going through this?
So I think just somebody that wants to help, wanting to help is huge. I mean, I can't even put into words how important that is, but just being there for them and letting them know, again, I could definitely say this until I'm blue in the face, but reminding them that it isn't their fault, that nothing that they did was their fault, and that you're there for them, and let them know, like, I understand if you don't want to talk about it. And I like to tell people, instead of saying, let me know if you need anything, which I hear from people all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but saying to them, like, hey, would it help if I brought over dinner later?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to this pasta pop up. I'm going to pick up some stuff. Let me know if you want me to just drop it off. We don't even have to talk.
Yeah.
But knowing that if somebody's stressed and they're going through a lot, just like with depression, some things kind of slide. Maybe they don't shower as much. Maybe they forget to eat. But even asking them, like, what's going to help you feel safe? And being okay if their response is, I don't know. Because sometimes things
Yeah.
feel awful. And it's not great that they're awful, but it's okay to say, things fucking suck. And I don't know what's going to fix it.
Yeah. Because ultimately, and this is something that, I've come to realize, it's something that happened to you. And you get to take that and own it. And my mom's a writer. You spin it into like the tapestry of your life, right? And it might not be neat. The stitches might not be perfect or pristine like, some other parts of your life, but it's there and it's yours.
I love that because it's thinking of it this way, that that's something that happened to you. That isn't you. And speaking as a woman who identifies as a queer woman and has been through trauma, yes, I was abused. But when I introduce myself to people, I don't say, hey, my name's Holly. I was abused.
Yeah.
It was part of my life. And there's sometimes that it's a bigger part than others. But it's just something about me. Like, I like the color pink. And this is also something that happened. And for me, talking about it has helped, especially when I'm talking about it when I choose to, has helped because it does remind me that this is something many people have gone through. And I think people need to know that they are not alone.
Absolutely.
And it's just something that happened, and they now have the ability to take control over it. And there's times that it's going to spike up, and healing is definitely not linear. And I don't want to get into toxic positivity and being like, it's your own story.
Right.
There's times when it's going to suck, and it might pop up in very weird ways.
Oh, yeah, you never know.
But learning about that is part of it, and also getting past it. And for me, every once in a while, I know for me, it's been exciting to be like looking back and realizing, oh, my upstairs neighbor was shouting and it didn't make me panic right away. That's a little personal win. And for me, that makes me feel amazing that I'm growing and I'm getting past it. And it isn't easy, like with any trauma. And I think the science has gotten really interesting lately because there's so much work that's been done on PTSD and is continuing to be done.
Yeah. Okay. This has been great. I guess I would point people towards RAIN, right? I have that right. The rape, assault, incest
National
network. Yeah.
And they've just got a plethora of just like really great info, even if somebody goes to the website, and letting people know that when people will call our hotline or when people talk to me now as a crisis counselor, if they say, my friend was assaulted, we don't always assume you mean you. Sometimes there's just some really good people out there. And I remember one day somebody called and you can cut this if this is a random or long story, but somebody called and I probably had a 15-minute phone conversation with somebody who said they wanted to know just some basic stuff like how common is assault? And then what if you were dating the person? Is it still assault? And they went through all these scenarios. And to this day, I have no idea if it was about them or a friend, or they were writing a paper, or they were just curious. But I think it's also important for people to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
But RAIN is great. There's so many other resources. People can always reach out to crisis text line.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. That is a thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So they can, and again, that's for some people and not for others, but they can just text 741 741. I always suggest Scarletine.
Okay.
They have a great amount of info. They even have some stuff on sexual assault itself, but even just learning your body and getting comfortable with your body.
Yeah, those are all great resources. 741 741. Okay, well, is there any like last things you want to say about encouraging words, last pieces of advice, for somebody who might be struggling with something like this?
Just know that you're not alone. There's people out there, even if it means going on Reddit or Facebook and finding a group that you can interact with, whether you choose to do it anonymous or not. And I'm just thankful for people like you, Rachel, that put this info out there and say it happens. It doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to be what changes you. In some way, you'll never be the same person again, but that you can move on.
Yeah. Life is difficult, but it is also beautiful, and it will be beautiful again.
Yeah. I mean, I like to tell people, I can't say it's going to get 100% better tomorrow, but it's worth it to just keep trying. And some days suck and some days are setbacks. And that's when, even for me, some days suck and I go home and I make a drink and I turn up some music and I dance in my living room.
Mm-hmm.
And it sometimes helps a little, sometimes a lot. Or I just have a friend that I call and I go, I just need to bitch about random stuff, or tell me about your day.
Mm-hmm.
Distract me in any way possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Know thyself, know what you need, know what works for you.
Yeah, and find what makes you happy. And if what used to make you happy doesn't make you happy anymore, now you have a glorious reason to find some new stuff.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much, Holly. This has been amazing. I know it's a heavy topic, of course, but it's so important, and heavy's good sometimes. And I admire the work that you do so much. It must be exhausting, but it's really important, and we need people like you. So thank you for coming on and talking.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, everybody. This is Rachel Dalton with my guest, Holly. And this has been Wine, Dine, and 69. And let's keep talking.